Chapter 1. Degrees of Militancy. Enterprise is a form of militancy without moral provocation and without enemies. Like faction, it feels itself to be a virtue, not only for showing courage and initiative, but particularly for doing so peacefully, without any lust for blood or vengeance, and purely at the call of some open chance to attempt untried and glorious things. And yet, although so blameless and admirable in itself, enterprise somehow secures less admiration and honor than do military or revolutionary achievements. The abusive rhetorician and the smashing victorious general get all the ovations, and the man who has proved his mastery over the fruitful world is never entrusted with the government. War and revolution are public and dramatic events in which everyone participates, at least in imagination. But the private discoveries and inventions of the adventurous mind work the transformation of society, often without being noticed at all. Even the disasters of warlike ambition fill history with the tales of heroism and martyrdom, and even more dramatic crimes and punishments, if remembered, excite only ridicule or contempt. Enterprise is indeed less social than faction in its inspiration, so that the world is naturally less concerned with it as it arises, although society may be more affected by it in the end. Empires and forms of government disappear completely at frequent intervals, while the arts and fashions that distinguish each civilization, although they may be lost on the surface, usually leave their mark in the habits of at least part of mankind. The 19th century began with two extraordinary eruptions of faction: the French Revolution, tamed by spreading, and the Napoleonic Wars. The first of these is still at work in several different ideologies and parties, while the second has passed away like a summer thunderstorm. The second half of that century, on the contrary, was filled with brilliant enterprise in science and industry, producing a revolution in the equipment of human life and mind, which has continued with acceleration to the present time, and is presumably destined to make a wholly new era in the relation of mankind to the latent energies of matter, medicine most beneficently, communications and means of transit most astonishingly, by radio and air, have respectively relieved and frivolously complicated human existence. Meantime, the two general wars on an unprecedented scale, and the Russian Revolution, with its repercussions everywhere, have left the intellectual and political world bewildered. It had thought, until 1914, that dominated, as it was, by beneficent enterprise, it would continue to grow daily more populous, richer, better instructed, freer, and more secure, in its picturesque variety of nations, all united in one web of accelerated motion, time saved, labor lightened, and sports, private, but more conspicuously public and professional, filling up the leisure of all classes and nations with harmless excitement. Still floating in the haze of this mentality, the prophets of enterprise founded the League of Nations, and 25 years later, the rather too similar organization of United Nations. In this, as a charter member, was included the Soviet Union, an ultra-democratic comrade who had been allied to the conquering Germans and had been saved by American aid from their treacherous invasion. A comrade who now took the Germans' place, occupied half their territory, and obtained the right to veto in the Council of the United Nations every measure that the other comrades proposed. It might seem that the prophets of enterprise, in their innocent goodness, were not militant at all. What other ministers of foreign affairs ever carried goodwill and cooperation so far? I think, however, that the pure essence of militancy is more dominant in these prophets than in ordinary hunters or warriors. The latter are prompted at bottom by material needs or material lures. Renown and praise, which saints and poets may also obtain, do not satisfy lordly natures without the general obedience and the material domination which their feats can procure. Their ambition is to improve their position rather than to transform the world. But the desire to improve the world is militancy in excelsis. It involves not only the exercise of power, but the miracle of creation, to see mankind adopt one's thoughts obey one's precepts, and draw forever the line between good and evil exactly where we have drawn it. What enterprise could be more ambitious and show more extraordinary self-confidence than the assumed mission to judge and convert all the rest of the world? Can these politicians and socialist professors of philosophy think themselves divinely inspired? Or can they regard their own country or their own party as one right model and right censor for all mankind? It is not in such plain words that they proclaim their purposes, but rather in terms of the economic or popular advantages that they enjoy at home and generously wish to diffuse among less fortunate peoples. They hardly conceive that these other peoples may have different aspirations. Sometimes, indeed, they seem to say so, and to advocate the right of self-government for all nations, yet they establish at the same time a universal authority to which all would have to bow if it were able to govern. Perhaps the cause of this contradiction lies in the fact that enterprise in the economically advanced countries has been chiefly economic. All nations would like to be prosperous, and if it were only as a guide to prosperity that a universal authority was to be established, it might speak and act impartially in the light of science. But some traces of moral and cultural militancy seem to remain in the proposed universal government, and the attempt to impose such constraints, not imposed already by nature, at terrible cost on the unprepared, will be, of all enterprises, the most deeply egotistical and probably the least successful. Chapter 2. The Romance of Enterprise. There is a romantic side to all militancy, conspicuous in outlawry and war, and in the lure of seafaring, so magical for the boyish mind. But there is more homely romance in the merchant's fortunes also, with its foreign perspectives, its memories and relics of successful ventures and varied contacts. Even without now going far from home, the share in great engineering or financial operations brings the whole world, as it were, into a focus there. And the wealth that he may amass need not be merely material and enslaving, but a continual bond with far-reaching revolutions and exotic arts. This atmosphere may well surround a great merchant in his old age, and be the medium in which his children grow up, much more liberal than the air of military or factious households. For the young merchant himself, if he plunged without much backing into perilous enterprises, there was a different quality of liberal excitement in earlier life. There was hazard. The risk, incidental to all business, may become the dominant phase of it for the speculator or the stock exchange, and he may be ruined as easily gambling there as on the turf. But the defiance that makes the manly vanity of a wager, even in a game of pure chance, qualifies trade only by the way, because here the occasion for betting is likely to be in expert knowledge, or the illusion of expert knowledge, and this is a factor, not in the risk of enterprise, but in the art and sure conduct of it. When the merchant holds a trump hand and can guess the hand of his rivals, he is legitimately playing for results that will count in the world, for the right conduct of public operations, and not merely for the excitement of playing with the superstitious hope of being suddenly rich. These spontaneous and liberal elements in enterprise should not be lost sight of if we hope to do justice to its political developments. Utilitarian economists, jealous of public rights against all the private passions of the public, may denounce the profits of trade, as they might the rents of landlords, as being a sort of antecedent robbery of what should have belonged to the people. Yet these innocent robbers, who form a part of the people with primary human needs and ambitions, and to satisfy these needs and ambitions, forms in turn an integral part of the public good. So the arts and risks of the merchant have a natural attractiveness of their own, apart from any predatory motives that an envious revolutionary rhetoric may eventually charge them with. The dominance of trade comes about as innocently as the dominance of speech, and is just as much an element in the growth of human society. Every lively animal, in his idle moments, loves to experiment with his tongue or with his claws, and see what things he can do and what sounds he can make. And these manual or vocal sports may become ingrained in his system, pleasant, inevitable, and by chance useful. So singers and poets, comedians and orators, priests and prophets acquire their special arts, and perhaps win general applause and public esteem. And yet their position in society remains at bottom precarious. Essentially, their hold is only on the imagination. By accident, they may acquire a material use, yet there is nothing to insure their acts against proving utterly vain and perhaps pernicious. So a school of ancient prophets and poets accused commerce of having destroyed human happiness, and spoke of Sakrapanas, the accursed keel that had brought foreign wares and corruption into Arcadia. And not only may the enterprise of adventurers be suspected of having evil consequences in itself, but it may be seen, even by us today, to avail itself of all those dubious auxiliary arts that misguide the unwary by appeals to the imagination. Instead of comparatively innocent cries of vendors or heralds announcing their wares or their news, we now have advertising and propaganda, arts explicitly bent on bending the public mind to party advantage. The process is like that of a lottery, catering to human weakness and popular delusions for the benefit of partial interests, themselves probably hollow and deceptive.